One of the most stressful times in my life was also one of the happiest. A few years ago, I am working full time at a job where I am selling medical equipment, and it's going pretty good. Like, I'm one of the top ranked salesmen in the entire Northeast. My manager wants me to speak at their national conference that's coming together. I'm also working part time as a youth director at a church, and it's going well. Like, kids are coming to faith, they're growing in their relationship with Jesus more than they have in a very long time. I'm also going to school part time online, trying to get good grades. My wife and I also lead a young adult Bible study at our house. That's going pretty well. Some weeks it is so full that people are literally sitting on the stairs of our house because we don't have room on the floor anymore. We're also trying to buy our first house together. I'm also trying to stay physically fit, active, so I'm waking up at 5 a.m. every single morning. And some mornings I go get my brother, bring him back to the house afterwards, and all of a sudden, we get to have a family vacation. We go on vacation, my wife and I, we get away for a couple days. It's a nice little break. But literally on the way home from the airport, my phone starts to vibrate. So I pick it up and I see that it's my manager calling me. I'm like, okay. So I answer it. And she says, hey, Will, I have the director of the Northeast on the line with us. I'm like, that's a little strange, but I'm thinking to myself, okay, here it comes, baby. Here comes that big promotion I've been waiting on. Here comes that bonus. Man, they had to get the director involved this time. I'm ready to receive whatever they're ready to give. And she says, hey, actually, don't bother coming back to work after your vacation. In fact, the entire company is shutting down. 3,000 people across the entire United States are losing their jobs, and you're one of them. A few weeks after that, my wife tells me that she is pregnant with our first child. And so I went from being busy to being very busy, because even though I wasn't working anymore, now I have the stress of trying to find a job. I've got to update my resume, send it out, apply to jobs, interview. I've also now got the stress of how am I going to provide for my family? I'm living in a home that I actually bought when I was making a lot more income than I am now. Oh, and by the way, all those other part-time things I'm doing, they're not any less. In fact, they're getting more and more and more. So I was doing and doing and doing until one day I hit the wall. And I completely burnt out. You know that feeling when you just have nothing left to give, but life just keeps demanding more and more from you? That's what burnout is. Now, I think at different times in our life, we may have all experienced like a little piece of that, but it might be helpful for us all to come together to get an understanding of what the definition of burnout really is. Now, the definition of burnout is found in the ICD-11, which is like this dictionary for mental health professionals. And the actual definition is a little technical. So here's the simplified summary version of that. Burnout is a state of mind caused by constant stress at your job. It is exhibited by three distinct characteristics. The first one is feeling completely drained or exhausted. Second, feeling distant from your job, like you just don't care anymore, or you've become negative or cynical about it. Third, feeling like you aren't doing your job well, even if you used to. If you've ever had a job before, can you relate to this just a little bit? Show of hands. You ever experienced burnout a little? Okay, yeah, thank you. Thing is, burnout applies specifically to jobs, but I think we can apply it to the jobs in our life that don't just give us a paycheck. Because we all got a lot of jobs in our lives that don't pay very well, do they? How about this? Mom and dad, parents, can you relate to this? Feeling completely drained or exhausted by your kids. Feeling distant from your family, like you just don't care anymore, or you've become negative or cynical about them. Feeling like you aren't being a good parent, even if you used to. How about this? Maybe you're a student here today. Have you ever felt completely drained or exhausted by school? Oof. Feeling distant from your studies, like you just don't care anymore, you've become negative or cynical about them. Or number three, feeling like you aren't doing good enough in school, even if you used to. Maybe you're here and you're in retirement or you're approaching retirement. I wonder if you can relate to this. Feeling completely drained or exhausted because of your health. Feeling distant from your life or your purpose, like you just don't care anymore, or you've become negative or cynical about it. Or maybe you feel like you're just not doing enough, even if you used to. Man, the feeling of burnout can attack us at any part of our life stage. And I think that we all have experienced it to some degree in the past. And I want to be very careful to mention that I know that there are some of you here right now who are currently experiencing burnout. You're just feeling like you got nothing left to give. And I think as we look to help others find peace of mind, I think we can all think of at least one other person that we know who might be feeling burnt out. The tricky thing about burnout is this. The things that people tell you to avoid burnout and to get out of burnout actually make burning out worse, right? They say, what do they say? Spend more time on yourself. Exercise more, sleep better, eat better, enjoy your hobbies more, do less, don't be so stressed out, rest more, sleep in, take better care of yourself. And so you're doing more and more and more, and you're getting more and more stressed out, and you just get more and more stuck and overwhelmed and exhausted and burnt out by trying to not burn out. Then you start to feel guilty because you're struggling with burnout so much, and all the things that you're trying to do not help. Burnout is like quicksand. It's like the harder that we try to get out of it, like the more stuck that we get. So what do we do? Thankfully, Jesus speaks directly onto this issue in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Just 2 verses today, but let me tell you, these are some of the most important verses in the entire Bible. This is like a cheesecake. It is dense. It is rich. There's a lot here to unpack in just a small little amount. Before we jump into Matthew chapter 11, a little bit of context is going to be really helpful for us. So Jesus is speaking to crowds of people. There's a crowd of people in front of him. The people that he's speaking to are feeling burnt out. They're feeling overwhelmed and exhausted and tired and hopeless because they have been crushed under the weight of obligation from the spiritual religious law. The religious leaders back then said, if you want to be good with God, you've got to have a perfect standard of behavior. No stress. You've got to be perfect. And oh, by the way, if you're not perfect, to make up for your lack of perfection, you've got to do all these religious rituals and ceremonies and practices perfectly so that you can have a relationship with God. The crowd back then, man, they were regular, everyday folk like you and me. They still got the same problems that we do today. And they're like, you want me to be perfect? They were feeling completely overwhelmed, burnt out, and stressed by that. They still got all the stuff that we do. They got kids running around the house screaming. They got bills piling up. Their backs hurt too. They had all the same problems that we do. And so Jesus addresses this crowd of burnt out, overwhelmed, stressed out people, and he says this. He says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden. The word labor means that people who are tired, people who are weary and exhausted. And heavy laden is similar, but it's a little bit different. It describes that feeling that you have when you are under active weight. It's like you've got the burden and the weight still on your back. It's like if you're at the gym and you've got the bar on your back and you're straining to lift it, that's the tired that he's talking about. Because when I get home from the gym, let me tell you, I'm tired. But it's a different kind of tired than when I still have the weight on my back. That's a whole different kind of tired. Myself, a couple of men, yesterday at 6 a.m., we showed up. We went to the Burnt Hills High School track and we did a workout. And when I got home, I was tired. But it was a whole different standard of tired than when I was doing the workout. What Jesus is saying is, you don't have to have it all figured out. He's calling the people that are in the middle of the mess. He's not just asking the people who have dealt with it and are feeling exhausted from the workout. He's saying, if you're in the middle of it, I want you to come to me. And then he makes an incredible promise. He says, I will give you rest. No wonder this guy had crowds of people following him. That's a pretty big promise. Can you imagine the crowds back then? They were like, yes, Jesus, I need some of that. What you're giving out, I need some. Maybe you're here today and you're feeling burnt out, stressed, you've got stuff piling up in your life, and you're thinking the same thing. You're saying, yes, Jesus, that would be nice. I could use some rest in my life. But what he says next is absolutely shocking. To the crowd of overwhelmed, stressed out, burnt out people, he says, I'm going to give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. He's not talking about an egg yolk here. The yoke that Jesus is talking about, it's this heavy wooden beam that would go around the necks of oxen so that they could pull and plow the field. This is what it looked like. This heavy wooden piece that would go around the necks of oxen that would help them plow the field. The people back then would have been a little confused, and maybe you're a little confused now, because Jesus just promised them rest. He's talking to people who are currently heavy laden. They've already got a weight around their neck. And he says, come to me, I'm going to give you rest. First thing you got to do is put this yoke on your back. I don't know about you, but when I look at that picture, rest is not the first word that comes to my mind. That's not my idea of a restful afternoon, I'll tell you that much. What is he doing? He says, take my yoke upon yourself. It's like if you were at the gym and you had a bar on your back and you're straining to lift it and you're saying, Jesus, I need a little bit of help here. And he says, sure thing, I got you. And he puts another plate on. How's that supposed to help me? I think the key here is to look at exactly what Jesus promises. He does not say that he's going to make our life easier, does he? He says that he's going to give us rest. And making an easy life is different than getting rest. There's a difference between having an easy life and having rest. See, what Jesus is doing is he's being honest with us. Because when you become a follower of Jesus, your life doesn't magically get easier, does it? No. You still got screaming kids. You still got bills piling up. You still have that coworker who annoys you. You still got all the stuff that you're dealing with. And now you've got more to do. Now you've got to do the things that help you learn and grow in your relationship with Jesus. Let's be honest with each other. It's way easier to sleep in on a Sunday morning than come here, isn't it? It is. It'd be nice to get brunch. And let me tell you, coming to church on Sunday morning, that's the easiest part about following Jesus. It gets way harder. Loving your enemies is way harder. Loving your family like Jesus loves you is way harder. Having humility is way harder. Spreading the gospel, making the top priority of your life to seek the kingdom, that's way harder. Jesus does not make our life easier. He makes it harder. Jesus is always raising the standard. He tells the religious leaders back then, you guys got it all wrong. You're telling people that not to murder each other, but I'm saying if you look at someone with hate in your heart, you've committed murder. Jesus is always raising the bar. He's making it harder. So if we are trying to avoid burnout and help other people with burnout, the answer is not to do less work. The answer is to do the right work. It's not to do less work, it's to do the right work, because the Jesus work leads us to rest. The answer is not to do less, it's to do the right thing. And the rest that Jesus promises us is not a mental rest, it's not a physical rest, it is a rest for our souls. It's that soul rest. That's an eternal rest. That's freedom from the crushing weight and condemnation of sin and guilt and shame. That's freedom that when we die, we get to be with God in heaven for eternity. That's an eternal rest and freedom and peace. And that's not just something that we have to wait until we die. That's something that Jesus gives us right now. He gives us that supernatural soul rest. That's the rest that you can be going through hardship in your life and you can be busy and someone can look at you and think you're crazy because you have peace. Jesus doesn't make our life easier, but he gives us soul rest. Now, I want to be honest with you for a second, and I'm a little nervous to do this, to be honest, because this is something that I've struggled with a lot. And it's something that I've seen y'all struggle a lot. This is something we all struggle with a lot. When we get burnt out, oftentimes the first thing that we do is we take off the yoke. Oftentimes when we get overwhelmed and stressed with life, the first thing we do is we take off the yoke. The first thing that suffers is our relationship with Jesus. The first thing that we cut out is our relationship with Jesus. Now, we live in America, and when I say relationship with Jesus, probably most of your minds just went to your personal devotional time, where it's your private relationship with him, where you pray and you read scripture and you meditate, and that stuff is good, but that is not where the enemy will attack you first. The first place that the enemy will attack you is in your public community relationship with Jesus. It's community. We learn from Jesus. We grow in our relationship with Jesus with other people over and over and over again in Scripture. Jesus tells us, the Bible tells us, God tells us that we need each other. We need to be uplifting each other, bearing up underneath one another's burdens, speaking words of encouragement, correcting, pointing back to Jesus. We need each other. And the enemy loves it when we isolate ourselves. When we say, hey, I'm just going to take a step back from this and from that and the other thing, and I'm just going to be spending time with me and God. Do you know, every single predator in creation, the first thing that they do when they're trying to attack an animal that's in a herd of other animals is they watch and they wait for the isolated one, the sick one, and the weak one, and they try to separate that one from the herd so that they can attack and kill it. It's no mistake that Peter compares the devil to a lion who's always looking for someone who is isolated and alone so that he can devour them. Don't make it easier for him. When we're feeling burnt out and overwhelmed and stressed, that's when we need each other the most. That's when we need to be leaning into community with one another the most. If we're going to cut other things out of our life, we've got to be very careful because, listen to me clearly, I'm not saying that you can never say no to anything. I'm not saying that you shouldn't draw boundaries in your life. But God is saying, be very careful not to draw boundaries around the things that help you to learn from Jesus, that help you to grow in your relationship with him. It doesn't make sense if we think about it. Why would you cut off the thing that is going to give you rest? If you need to start trimming the things in your life, look to everything else. Look to the sports. Look to the extra hours at work. Look to that job promotion. Look to those things that you can take that are going to take you away from the thing that gives you life. The work that we do for Jesus, we may be busy and it will be hard. But there is not a direct correlation between difficulty, how hard something is, and what it feels like. Because it's possible that right now you might be feeling a little discouraged. Like if you're here and you're like burnt out, you're like, oh, Will's just giving me another thing that I got to do. Well, Jesus anticipated that we might feel that way. And he describes what following him will be like. He says that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. The way that Jesus wants us to feel about when we hear these words is not, oh my goodness, I've got another thing that I've got to do. He wants us to go, oh, wow, I may be busy, but this is something that gives me life. What Jesus is saying is that the yoke that I'm going to put on your neck, it's not a burden to weigh you down. It's like a life vest around someone who is drowning. The weight that he puts around our neck lifts us up, and it can keep our head above the water and give us air to breathe. We're not going to be crushed. He says, following me is going to feel easy and light. I'm going to be the one that leads you to a place of rest. There is not a direct correlation to the amount of effort that we put into something and how hard it is for us. Because I don't know about you, but doing the dishes, that takes me about 5 minutes, but that is hard. Like, that feels like a heavy, heavy weight. Folding laundry takes 20 minutes. Oh my goodness, I dread it. It feels so painful to do some things, but what Jesus is saying is the stuff I'm giving you to do might actually be hard, but it is not going to feel hard. It's going to be easy and light. It's going to be life-giving. Do you know, there is only one place in the entire Bible where Jesus tells us what his heart is like. One place in the entire Bible where Jesus tells us what his heart is like. And for the ancient person, someone's heart was the core of their being. It wasn't just where their emotions were, it was where everything about them was. At the most fundamental level, you were who you were in your heart. That's what makes this passage so important, because this is where Jesus tells us what his heart is like. What does he say? He says that he is gentle and lowly in heart. Jesus is saying that he is gentle and lowly. The word gentle can also be translated as kind. Jesus is saying that he's kind. He's not easily frustrated. He's not easily exasperated. He doesn't have a quick temper. And he says that he is lowly. The word lowly means approachable. Jesus says, I am kind and approachable. Why would Jesus need to tell us that he's approachable? Don't forget, Jesus is God. He is the highest being in creation. There is no other thing that is higher than him. His name is greater than everything else. Every single blade of grass, every single grain of sand, every single atom and electron in the universe, every single breath that is going into your lungs, your heart beating right now, every single thing in all of creation is constantly being upheld by the power of his will. He has no beginning and he has no end. Our minds cannot comprehend him. He is completely holy and perfect. If we got a glimpse of his glory, it would make us blind. If we looked upon him in his fullness, we would drop dead instantly. Jesus is God. He is big, and he says that he's approachable. He says that he is kind and approachable. If you got to sit face to face with Jesus and you said, Jesus, please tell me a little bit about yourself, in 2 words describe you, how does a God describe himself? Kind and approachable. Let's just sit in that for a second. God says that he is kind and approachable. Is that how you think of him? What that means is Jesus is saying, you don't have to get your life together to come to me. You don't have to have it all figured out. He's talking to a crowd of people that are burnout, stressed. They got bills piling up, kids screaming at home, backs hurt. And he says, you don't have to have it figured out to come to me. I'm going to be kind and approachable when you do. How do we help people when they're experiencing burnout? The answer is very simple, is we need to bring them to Jesus. Healthy habits, exercise, food we eat, good rest, that stuff is good. Being a good friend, being a good listener, and praying for people and helping people in practical ways, that is good. But the only way to experience true rest is to go to Jesus. Jesus says that he is the God of rest. He gives us rest that is for all of eternity and is for now. It's not enough just to be a problem solver with people. We have got to bring them to the one who is kind and approachable. You know, when I hit the wall in that summer, and my job fired me, I got laid off, and we were in the house, my wife had a baby, and I was completely burnt out. I went to people for advice and for counsel and for help and to share my heart, and they told me things like, Will, you should probably just try to relax a little bit. You should probably try to do less. Maybe, have you tried going on a walk? Don't worry about it. It's all going to work out. You're going to find a job. I don't have to tell you that that didn't help. I know you've received that advice before. It did not help. And it was not until my wife and I went on a date night to Simone's Kitchen in Schenectady where she reminded me of who God was. That Jesus was kind and approachable. And then I realized that I was struggling with burnout because I didn't have control of things anymore, and I didn't trust him. I didn't have control of my life or of my family or of my future, and I didn't trust God. But when she reminded me of who Jesus was, I realized that I could. I realized that I had a very little faith in a very big God, and that I could trust him because of who he is. Fireside Church, here's the reality. We are going to go through hardship in our life. We are going to be burnt out. And hardship is not polite. It doesn't come one at a time. It comes one after the other, after the other, after the other, and it stacks up and stacks up and stacks up. And if we're not careful, we're going to get burnt out. And what we need to do is to go to Jesus. Not by doing something else, but from learning from him and trusting him that he is kind and approachable. And we've got to bring people with us to him. Don't just be stuck problem solving for people. Bring them to the foot of Jesus. Bring them to the God of rest. We need to bring people to Jesus. Let's pray.